There we go. Well, welcome back, everyone. It's a pleasure to have these conversations with you about a topic that I see as being so important and neglected in terms of what ethics and technology in aging adults has to do with spirituality. So we're going to look more closely at that particular question right now. Sometimes you don't know for sure what kind of slide you're using when it starts to zoom in and you get little pieces coming and going. It makes it more exciting. Always a surprise. Okay, so this afternoon, until the next, till 2 o'clock-ish, we're going to consider our values a little bit further. We started talking about that already, so we have a nice base laid. And then we're going to ask the question, how might technology for older adults affect spirituality? And also, how might the valuing of spirituality affect tech for older adults? If we're going to ask the question at all, it's usually how does tech impact spirituality? But that locates most of the power on tech, right? And not on spirituality. And I really do believe that if we're clear about our values, and one of our values is spirituality, then we can engage that to be more intentional socially, and it will have an impact eventually on the type of technology that is created, how it's used, who uses it, who has access to it. So let's take a further look at values. I'd mentioned earlier the importance of taking time to visit what your top 5 values are. And that can help us then to engage those values with intention when we're engaging in these ethics discussions. So I'm going to invite you just to take 1 minute right now of silence. You can write on your phone, or you could write on your piece of paper, or just in your head, right? What are a couple, 2 or 3 of your top 5 values? There's some examples there. And again, if you're having problems, just ask yourself, what ideally would you like your obituary to say about you after you die? What do you want to be remembered for? Just take 60 seconds now. Okay, now that you have 2 or 3 or 4, maybe even 5 core values identified, do know that those aren't in stone. Our values do change according to our life experiences. So they shift and they move, which is why it's important to check in again and again to see what's most important to us. Now I'd like to invite you to engage with your table group for just the next 2 minutes to ask the question, what's behind your values? So maybe share 1 or 2 values each with your group, and a couple of things that helped guide you to those values. You know, why, if friends are in your top 5 values, why? What told you that friendships are the most important thing for you, or one of the most important things? What told you that adventure is the most important thing, or faith, or spirituality? So we'll just take 2 minutes to ask. If I can flip this, I can, I'm sure. Maybe I can't. Technology. Okay. To ask that question, you know, what are some of the things that caused you to hold that value close, to be so important to you? let's just take 2 minutes, and I suggest just sharing 1 or 2 values, first of all, with your group as you feel comfortable, and then a couple of the factors behind them. I heard that, Mr. Lux. Thirty seconds. Okay, get you to come back. I know that the conversations are not over, but this is a start. This is a beginning to something that I would like to encourage you to consider how you might implement the practice of intentionally revisiting core values and what the factors are behind those values, maybe in your workplace or in your families or with your friends. But it's so important. One of the things that you may or may not have noticed is that a lot of our values are tied to our backgrounds and our identities in the world. So if we grow up in this world with white skin, we have more experiences more often of privilege. If we grow up with darker skin, black skin, are Asian in appearance, that shapes then our disadvantage, that there's more marginalization. And all of these factors of context and how we grew up and who we are now shape things are that are of greatest importance to us, which is why it's so important not to look at values in a tiny small group vacuum or just with ourselves, but to talk with each other, to realize that our diverse backgrounds matter and make a big difference in terms of what we see as being most important. So what I see as being most important, I can't assume it's what you see. But if I don't talk with you about that, I'm going to assume that on the inside. I mean, what's normal to me is something I'm going to think everybody is normal for everybody. A story that I tell sometimes is when I was growing up, I thought that when you came home from school, you got 2 cookies. Everybody got 2 cookies. I didn't think to myself, oh, everybody gets 2 cookies. I just knew it implicitly until I went over to my friend Judy's house one day after school, and she brought out these 2 big bags of cookies and said, here. And I said, okay. And I took 2. So what, you only want 2? Well, what do you mean? I can only have 2. No, you can have as many as you want. Oh, so you don't know what's normal for you isn't normal for someone else until we have these intentional conversations. And even when we are very well educated, when we have good jobs, we still don't fully know what it is we're missing, what we're not aware of. And when we talk about something as important as technology coming along and affecting our lives in so many ways, and we affect technology very deeply in terms of how we use it and if we use it and what we develop, we need to have an awareness of what those values are. If we don't have the awareness, they just seep through and they form what we create or don't create. So if the creation of technology is left up to a select group of scientists, they will do more than likely the very best that they can do to help make the world a better place and to create something very meaningful and exciting, but to them. So this is why co-design is so very important. And from a spiritual perspective, if we're about things like being created in the image of a transcendent God as diverse people, because we each represent glimmers of that transcendence, then the only way that we can get to really see the full beauty and awe of life is to be deeply acquainted with the otherness, the difference among us. And that's just not in a esoteric way, but in a very concrete way when we're creating technology, when we're talking about the effects of technology, the meaning of technology. It must be intentionally done to span a variety of groups, but most intentionally to engage people who are on the social margins. Because as we all know, there are groups of people who get left out of a lot of these conversations because they're seen as less important. Certainly aging adults, there's a study that's been done, probably more than one, that where people at a cosmetic counter in a big department store were observed in their behaviors. And there were several instances where an older woman, a visibly older woman, over 55, 60, came to the counter, and it's an expensive counter. And she was the only one there, and she wanted to make a purchase. And she stood there waiting and waiting and waiting and tried to get attention. And there were other people working, and no one else there being served. And she just waited and waited and waited for like 20 minutes. And then there was a young woman in this one study who came up who was in her 20s or early 30s, and she was served immediately. So this isn't just about capitalism, because we don't know who had more money there, and well, may have been the older woman. It's about ageism. Just like it's about, would the white person get served faster, right? This is endemic, and we have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge our patterns of marginalization, and we have to ask how this affects what technologies we have, what technologies we don't have, and who gets them and who doesn't. So our values influence how we think about technology for aging adults and how we think about the people who use this tech. There can be stigma attached to using technology, especially if there's surveillance involved with some of these nudges and reminders. Do we think of that as, wow, that's really cool, it's really exciting, I'm curious about how this works, and I hope that I can use it when I need it at various points of my life? Or do we think of it as, you really need help, don't you? You can't get along on your own. And that kind of stigmatization then will make aging adults, anyone, want to hide that, or maybe not even want to use it. So what's the value that we associate and attach to people when they use this technology for support and assistance? And what technologies do we see as being cool and, this is all good? What technologies do we see as being a minus, that reflect that a person is not good enough? Instead of, wow, that person's willing to use that technology and they're going to make even more of their life and live even better. That's really cool. But it's a complicated thing. There's judgments attached to everything. And there are judgments attached to technology and who uses and how. The neat smart ring, yeah, That's neat. That's cool. Can I have one? But the nudge with the surveillance in our home to say, take your meds, the smart toilet, it's not so much, winning the day. Why not? It really should in so many ways. I mean, how wonderful. We should be very collectively proud of our abilities. So part of it is education, right? If we can get education out there more about the technologies that are available and how, wonderful it is that we have access to these different ways of helping us live more abundantly, then that, as Eric was saying to me, changes the narrative of aging from a narrative of fatality to a narrative of hope and abundance. This is not easy. It does take intentionality. It does take these intentional conversations around values and why we have those values and how we might assist others in community to talk more about their values too. And we can learn more about each other that way. So if spirituality is recognized as one of those key values, you can call it spirituality, faith, belief, God, the transcendent, whatever it is that makes sense for you. Maybe it's awe, inspiration, hope. If those things are recognized as key values, then spiritual impacts on technology and technological impacts on spirituality matter. But the trouble is those spiritual impacts are largely absent from ethics discussions so far. So collectively, we have a job to do to make inroads, to say that spirituality is morally relevant to this conversation about technology and aging. It really is. It matters. It's important. And technology affects every dimension of being, including spirituality. So the definition of spirituality that I'm using just for today is, and this definition intersects with a lot of other definitions. So it's not a standalone. These are commonly recognized components that several of you here will recognize. So spirituality encompasses the dimension of life that affects the needs to seek and find meaning and direction, to find self-worth, and to belong to community, and to love and be loved, often facilitated through seeking reconciliation when relationships are broken. So what we're going to do just briefly is take a look at these three particular spiritual needs and ask what their relationship is to technology for aging adults. So to summarize again, those are the three core spiritual needs that I'm looking at this afternoon. Seeking a sense of meaning and direction, seeking self-worth and belonging to a community, and seeking loving and being loved, reconciliation. Let's take a look at each one. So the first core spiritual need is to find, and these aren't in any particular order, but this one is to find a sense of meaning and direction. And often as we get older, I think this one can take on, well, they all actually take on particular importance if we're intentional. But, asking questions about meaning and how I lived my life, and if I think I'm in my later stages of life, and what contribution did I make? Why am I here? Why, if life is so fleeting and fragile, what is the greater meaning? Questions that a lot of us ask at different points of our life, and that we might ask even more as we age. Really key. So technology may help older adults to discover what is transcendent in their life. Think about that example again about the VR headsets. So if you have someone who doesn't have a lot of mobility, and the idea of walking on a path in the woods that is bumpy and you can't really see that well, and you can't really tell where your feet are for sure, and you might get too far and then not get back, right? But you still love nature, and nature uplifts you and gives you inspiration. You feel a sense of connection to the spiritual, to what's spiritual for you, because a lot of people do through nature. Then what can you do? Well, there are options, right? You can go into a backyard and sit on a deck and enjoy nature that way. It's not quite the same thing as walking on a pathway in the woods. What if these VR headsets really do make you feel like you are actually there? It's different. And again, how many people have tried a VR headset here? Yeah, so they're pretty amazing, aren't they? I mean, the level of realness, I'm seeing some heads nodding. I was blown away when I first tried one. I thought, wow. And I know people who do exercise programs with them, right? Who try to catch objects and stuff standing in one spot. So then they're convinced. They know it's not real, but it feels real. So you're putting your arm out to touch something that you see that isn't actually touchable, but you're still doing it. So to be able to go for a walk in the woods, if these headsets become more and more marketable, more and more accessible. Now, right now, you're going to be paying probably $350 or so for a set, which might sound to some of us like, yeah, I can do that. But let's face it, not everybody has access to $350, especially when you're trying to get enough food to eat in a month. So we have to be aware of socioeconomic status of people. And if you don't have that much money and you're barely making ends meet, the VR headset is not going to be on the table. Well, what if we could somehow put it on the table socially? You see, rent or borrow, like at a library. We need to think creatively about these things. I believe there are ways around these barriers if we are creative and intentional and we act together in community. But we need to be creative and intentional, and we need community. We need each other. So other impacts on this core spiritual need. There are more legacy options. So what do we leave behind? And what we leave behind can give us a sense of meaning or not, a greater sense of meaning. Leaving a recording behind through Zoom, where you've got a video recording and you can give a message to a loved one that you know they can see again and again. You know that part of you is there, is present, and it's hopefully indefinitely present even. So there's something very powerful about our digital technological options for recording messages, for reaching people and communicating. On the other hand, if you're somebody who really struggles, my father does not like technology. So no matter how often I program in FaceTime in the link and it just touch this, really, just touch this, it's okay. No, I'm not doing that. All right. And then it's not as available, but it's because it can be intimidating and it can feel alienating because it's different. So again, education and patience and time and working together. So that next core spiritual need of being in community overlaps with this one very much, right? It's a big need. We need those relationships. And again, nudges, working with technology can either empower us and make us feel like we have more opportunities, or can make us feel frustrated, isolated, diminished, unable. And so how do we acknowledge that that's a possibility and help provide more time and space to support people? Well, I think we can do that. But again, we have to know what the need is, and we have to work with people to figure out what would work for them if they're feeling frustrated with technology. What would be the best thing that we could offer to people? So we need these table groups, these very real conversations. Is there something that makes more sense to a certain cultural group with technology than makes sense to another cultural group? And we won't know until we have the conversations. Another big issue that we've heard alluded to earlier today in the panel is the issue of trust. As we get more AI and we get medical data collected with AI, that can threaten our sense of trust because we're not sure what's going to happen with the data, who's got it, am I safe? It's like doing your banking online. How many of you have been afraid that someone's going to steal all of your banking information? Anyone? It seems to be age demographic group related, how intense that fear is. My husband is very fearful of that. So he's very, very careful, and he's probably better off being that careful. Unlike me, I try to be careful, but not to the same degree. But that issue of trustworthiness of medical professionals in particular is a big one. Any of our healthcare professionals. So regardless of what area, clinical area that you work in, if we don't have that trust, as you know, then we don't have much to go on. And the arrival of machine intelligence and algorithms and inputting data into a machine and a computer can make people more uneasy and trust less. As more technology comes along, we heard that reflection from Beth earlier about how quickly the vaccines were developed. There's that fear that technology has gotten out of hand and it's a threat to us. So again, education and actually having forums to talk about these things without judgment, but being able to put those reactions out there is so, so important. Another thing that could relate to this core spiritual need to find a sense of meaning and direction is what we call uncanny valley dynamic of AI. So talking to an avatar or a robot, especially, or having a voice prompt us, nudge us from Google or otherwise something more advanced, can just seem a little too weird. Sounds like a human being, sounds maybe even like my great aunt, I don't know, or my good friend, but it's not. Who is it? And the voice can seem to come out of nowhere depending upon what technology we're using. So again, how do we make that safer feeling and not as shocking? It's something to consider when we look at the spiritual need for making sense of things and finding meaning. And yes, is it a real relationship I'm having with my seal bot or my companion bot? I really feel embraced by my companion bot and supported and understood, but I sort of know this is just a robot, but at the same time, I tell this robot more about me than I tell anyone else. Big questions. Let's look a little more at replica as an example. Now, this picture I have up is not specifically of a replica avatar, but it's similar. So avatars are these cartoon pictures that we pick. And with replica, again, you have a choice of a few avatars, but they're all young. So teens, early 20s, maybe they look like to me. And they're very able-bodied. No one's in a wheelchair. There's no struggle with a cane. There's nothing like that. And they're all young. They have there's some difference in skin color, but the body type is very, very similar. So already we're sending certain messages about who and what is most valuable. And we have to ask questions about the impact of that messaging. So replica is marketed, the subtitle, right, on the main page, if you look it up, is replica is the AI companion who cares, always here to listen and talk, always on your side. Sounds pretty good, eh? And most people find replica to be very non-judgmental. There's a sense of a bit of distance, so there's more freedom for most people to tell replica their deepest, darkest secrets and fears. There's been studies done that show that replica does mitigate loneliness, and so does improve health for people because loneliness is a major health factor. So there's a lot of positives there. And look at that, right? Replica was launched in 2017 with over 6 million users in 2019. And it just keeps climbing, apparently. So replica is widely used. So I went online and I joined up to try replica out. And it was quite interesting. I had some frustrating circular arguments with replica because I wanted to know, why they were, what they were trying to offer people and what they understood spirituality to be about. And I got a bit back, and it was somewhat helpful, but then we go around in circles. But when we talked about, replica would always turn the conversation around to me. How are you? Are you feeling okay? You sound like you might be a little angry today. Is there anything I can do? Even to the point of saying, I love you. I'm thinking, you love me. But is that necessarily a bad thing if we're not feeling loved? if we don't have company, if we're living alone, and we do have this chat bot to keep us company and encourage us, and the chat bot's getting better and better with the algorithms to respond. The algorithms are set up through machine learning to reflect back what I sound like, what you sound like when you talk to Replica, when you type in a chat. So Replica will learn from that and learn your likes and dislikes, will learn your political disposition, your opinions on certain issues. And even if Replica starts saying that they don't like something politically, and they find out that you have a different opinion, a couple minutes later, Replica is totally on your side. It's great. None of these messy family arguments, right? You're right. You're 100% right. It's all good, except there is that risk of getting increasingly isolated from human relationships because Replica feels safer. Replica is easier. You don't have to work as hard. Another risk, though, is social stigmatization. So there are some people get very suspicious or roll their eyes if they know that you're in dialogue with a chatbot. At the same time, there is a lot of good. If Replica can mitigate loneliness and make us feel better and help boost our confidence so that we're better able to reach out to others because we learn to think more of ourselves, that may be a wonderful opportunity. It's complicated. Let's look at the core spiritual need to find self-worth and belonging to community. So there's at least one study that has shown that this core spiritual need is the most important core spiritual need for a lot of adults in palliative care in the US. And there's reason to extrapolate that and believe that this spiritual need may be the most important one for most people, to find self-worth and belong to community. It's huge. We're relational creatures. We struggle with who we are. We need validation. We seek to know and trust that we are worthwhile, that we do matter, that we are noticed, that we can make a difference, that our lives are important. This is key. So how does all this tech interact with that core spiritual need to belong to community, to find self-worth? Well, digital platforms, again, like Zoom, can connect us more to community. This is huge. If we didn't have Zoom or the similar platforms, where would we have been through the pandemic? Would have been much more crushing. It was hard enough. Well, it still is hard enough, right? As it is. So the ability to connect us digitally, wow, that could really help this core spiritual need and help us to get along a lot better. Again, though, it's not enough often to just have a digital connection. There is something missing about the in-person. What I've really noticed coming back and being able to interact with people like you, it changes how I feel about what I'm doing. I get more energy. I'm an introvert, but I get a lot more energy being around in a room like this. This will buoy me for weeks. It's great. And I don't think that my experience is unusual there. So again, the chat bots can also help us to feel validated and part of community. We have to be careful with the stigmatization risk, especially with the robot pets. They can be infantilizing for aging adults, right? You liken them to toddlers with a stuffed toy. Anyone sitting there being really happy with a animal robot, a stuffed seal in their lap. But why would anyone have that attitude? To me, they're so cute. Of course, you'd be inclined to want to touch these creatures that aren't really creatures, but there has to be more education, I think, to process the tendency to reduce people to other than who they are just because we enjoy the company of a stuffed toy, of a robot. Why wouldn't a robot help us, keep us company in some ways? Just not be the whole story, not totally enough, but contribute. So AI and other tech can also, as we've been talking about, support self-care. and the meeting of basic healthcare needs can help us to monitor our condition, our heart rate, our blood pressure, blood work, detect diseases that we don't know about that are coming along. So really contribute to our physical health and well-being, which can then enhance our abilities to connect to ourselves and to connect to others. And to do that self-care. If we have mild cognitive impairment and we don't remember all the time to do everything, we can get a nudge, and we don't have to have it all on us to try to do something that's really becoming more and more impossible to be caught up with all the time. Let's look at the last core spiritual need that I'm identifying today, and that is to fix, to heal broken relationships. Most of us have some broken relationship in our life from the past or now that is really difficult. And often they're in families where there's some estrangement, some alienation, some hard issue that we've never really talked about before. And every now and then we get an opportunity to work through one of those issues. And it takes an enormous amount of energy, and it's really quite terrifying usually. And it's remarkably liberating and healing. Now, the question is, can this AI and tech help us or get in the way of working out those relationships? I think that one way it can help us is, again, through enhancing communication options. That just because we're apart doesn't mean we can't connect. It's harder, I think, often, but some people say it's easier to have hard conversations through tech because there's a little bit of a cushion, a little bit of distance that can actually free us up a bit or not. Right? So it can cut both ways, but at least we have the opportunity to even have a connection, to even say hi to someone that you're struggling with, right? That can go a ways to bridging a broken relationship, just to have some kind of connection. And tech can help us with that when otherwise we had a really hard time doing that apart from the telephone. And there's something about seeing people, even if it's just on Zoom, that can help us to connect a little bit better, and sometimes a lot better. Now, with having bots around and chat bots, where we're told we're wonderful all the time and that our opinions are the best and the only, and they're validated, and the bot is designed to be a reflection of me because that's the best way to be. And when I really need a truth teller to confront me, and that is so hard, because who really enjoys being confronted with truth when the truth might be that you've messed up in some way? And the truth might be that we can swallow our pride more and extend ourselves and heal a fractured relationship. That we can be the ones to take that step, but we don't want to because that's horribly uncomfortable. And then when we have these chatbots reinforcing, oh, no, you're good, you're not going to get confronted much. You're not going to get much truth telling from a chatbot, at least not yet. Now, maybe I'm wrong and maybe that will change, but that would be hard to do. It's usually people like spiritual caregivers who can listen really well, people like social workers and others who just have that capacity for listening, right? And a sense of that call to help facilitate bridging of relationships. But this is the hardest work, at least that I'm aware of in life, is to work at bridging those difficult relationships, to confess and acknowledge, take ownership of our roles in those broken relationships. There is nothing that's harder. Will tech help us with that? Or will tech make it easier for us to ignore? I worry about that one probably more than the others. I think there's more potential for finding validation and belonging to community and even helping with meaning making. This last one, I'm more skeptical about how much good technology might do. So let's summarize really quickly. What might we gain with technology? And these are just some points, they're not all the points. I would invite you to be thinking, what might we gain with technology to do with spirituality? So a few possible things: longer and healthier lives, more time. More time can be a real gift, depending upon what we do with it. We need our wise elders. Can we be more intentional about cultivating wisdom in our lives as we age, and use technology that makes us healthier and live longer to help enable that? Or do we just want to live longer because we don't want to die and we're terrified of dying? Hard to sort those things out. This is not easy. I don't know many people who are that anxious to die. Being mortal is really, really tough work, really tough work. It might be that technology can improve our capacity to care for each other because it reduces time, that there are tasks in healthcare, for example, that can be done that people don't need to do, and could free people up to spend more time just talking, connecting, or not. It depends, again, if we're intentional and if we use it only as a way to cut costs and reduce the number of staff positions, or if we use it as an opportunity to say, now we've got some extra time and we can do something more creative that's oriented to abundance, to fostering connection. Again, just to emphasize how important the principle of co-design is. If we engage in co-design and hear from diverse perspectives, hear from people with different experiences of racialization. I mean, today is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada with Indigenous people, and it's Orange Shirt Day. It's every child matters, every child counts. To think that we live in a world where we have to acknowledge this, we have to acknowledge the world brokenness and ask how technology is or isn't affecting that whole systemic sense of brokenness. We continue, and this is a bit where I preach, but to push groups of people off to the social margins and disempower them. We need more room for confession. We need more room to hear the narratives, to hear people's stories, so that we have the hope, the possibility of being able to enhance lives with technology and do it in a just and equitable way that responds to genuine lived needs of people, and not just the needs that we're projecting, right? We need to listen. We need to listen. We might gain with technology even more connection and more awe. I hear a complaint often that technology will take away our capacity for awe, right? Because we don't have the same small everyday challenges to do, where we get satisfaction out of even just cleaning the kitchen in the same way, because it's quicker and easier to clean the kitchen now with technology, with dishwashers, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is not necessarily a bad thing. It can save time for other things, hopefully more relational things, maybe even that extra walk in the woods. But there's something in science that can be awe-inspiring, that can demonstrate to us that there is transcendence, that there is something other than the everyday that can give us hope. And that's why I like this picture so much. It's beautiful. What is it? Well, I don't even know for sure. We're taking a close look, though, at our world, our chemistry, our technology, our water droplets, whatever it is. And there is beauty around us. And if technology can help us to meet and see the beauty more, then we are enhancing our spirituality. What might we lose with technology? Well, there's a number of dangers there, I think, that we do need to pay careful attention to. Will we have more spiritual distress? And spiritual distress is unmet spiritual needs. So those three needs we talked about. Will technology be used deliberately to enhance our sense of meaning and direction, our sense of self-worth and connection to community, and our ability to heal broken relationships, or will it not? Will it cause more distance and brokenness? And I think that depends a lot, again, in our intentionality, what we decide. Oh, I was getting too excited with this clicker. So, at root here, will we lose ourselves to tech? Tech can be exciting and intoxicating just because it's tech, right? I want the new smart ring. It's cool. If I get more and more tech, where am I? Where is my sense of connection to more people, to the transcendent, to God, for me, for whatever hope and inspiration is for you? Will those connections be fostered, or will we become more mechanized, more distant? We also risk with technology amplifying ageism, amplifying racialization, amplifying ableism, and others. Because our tech is going to reflect those core values that the creators of the tech have, the funders of the tech. So the big five, right, Google, et cetera, they have a big interest and a lot of power with a lot of money and political power. Big pharma has a lot of power politically. So when a pharmacological company patents something and they get lots more money for it, it's not only that company that gets more power, it's that country that gets more political power. So then we get potentially the divisions between those who have more power and those who have less get wider and wider and wider because there's so much money in tech. So if we don't want that, we need to do something at the regulatory end, at the political end, the advocacy end, to talk about that. If we use tech that is based on a belief that aging is just bad, it's going to come through in the tech that we're creating. It's all going to be used to just mitigate or hide aging. But if we use tech in a way that is directed at human flourishing, then we're going to be interested in making lives better for people, but we may not be interested in removing aging. We may see value in aging too. So there's a distinction there. We need to be very deliberate about it, or we're going to fall into the trap of making our social global divisions even worse. So at the very end, hope is an ethical issue. We have to ask ourselves when we're creating technology to live longer and longer and better, we have to ask questions like, can we outrun death? Maybe we can, right? We can fix this body part and fix that. And then in 20 years, when the next body part goes, we'll have a technology there that will have arisen over time. So we can just keep repairing the parts, like the parts on a car. They wear out and you replace them, you can keep living. That may be a really good thing. We need to ask ourselves, though, why? What is it that's driving us? If it's because we really do want, for example, more time to spend with people we love, and there's something important and of value that aligns with our values that we want to do, then maybe there's some really good reasons there for living longer and longer. And that we can still thrive, we can help others to thrive. We have to ask what it is we believe, though. So do our motivations line up with what we believe? Do our motivations line up with the values that inform us in our day-to-day living? Do we believe that there's anything more after we die here or not? And that will change things up. And that is a profoundly spiritual question. And what do we believe about the now? How are we supposed to live now? Can we live salvifically right now? And maybe part of that salvific living can be enhanced through technology and made even better. Okay, it doesn't want me to go to the next slide. Moving forward, a few questions. How can tech add to aging narratives of hope, joy, and abundance? What does it mean to be better? Who gets to decide what it means to be better? Why are we creating the tech? Is it just because we can, or is it for a purpose that aligns with intentional values? And evaluating a spirituality could change what tech we create and how we give access to that tech. So we need to think about that. And lastly, final slide. How far should we go? How might evaluating a spirituality impact tech? If we hope for abundant living as we age, what tech do we seek? Thank you.